The moon was quiet, too quiet. Its gray surface stretched endlessly under a sky filled with distant stars and the massive glow of a nearby gas giant. The only sound came from the soft hum of Liam Carter's boots as he walked across the rocky terrain. Beside him, Rachel Myers adjusted the strap of her survey kit, her eyes scanning the horizon for anything unusual. Their dog, Max, trotted ahead, his nose close to the ground, sniffing eagerly. He was always the first to notice anything different. Liam and Rachel had been stationed on this lonely moon for weeks. They were part of a small research team studying its geology, hoping to find valuable minerals or resources that could benefit Earth. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid well, and the isolation gave them time to think. Or at least, that's what they told themselves when the silence became overwhelming. Max suddenly stopped, his ears perking up. He let out a sharp bark, startling both Liam and Rachel. "What is it, boy?" Liam asked, crouching down to scratch Max behind the ears. But Max wasn't interested in attention. Instead, he took off running, his tail wagging furiously as he bounded towards something in the distance. "Hey, wait!" Rachel called out, jogging after him. Liam followed quickly, his curiosity piqued. Max rarely acted like this unless he found something interesting, usually a strange rock or an oddly shaped crater. But as they crested a small hill, they saw something far more unusual. Smoke rose lazily into the air, curling upward from what looked like the remains of a crash. Pieces of metal and debris were scattered across the ground, gleaming faintly in the dim light. At first, Liam thought it might be a piece of their equipment, but the design was unfamiliar. The wreckage was sleek and otherworldly, clearly not human-made. Rachel stepped closer cautiously, her hand instinctively reaching for the scanner at her belt. "Do you think?" she began, trailing off as her voice faltered. Before Liam could answer, a faint sound caught their attention, a whimper barely audible over the wind. Both froze, looking around. Max barked again, his focus fixed on a large jagged rock near the edge of the crash site. Cautiously, they moved closer, and that's when they saw her. A small figure huddled behind the rock, trembling. She, or at least it looked like a she, had pale blue skin that shimmered faintly, and her large almond-shaped eyes glowed softly in the dim light. Her clothes were torn, and she clutched a strange device in her hands, pressing buttons frantically, though nothing seemed to happen. When she noticed Liam and Rachel approaching, she flinched, backing further into the shadows. "It's okay," Rachel said gently, kneeling down to appear less threatening. She spoke slowly, even though she knew the girl wouldn't understand. "We're not going to hurt you." Max, sensing the tension, sat beside Rachel and wagged his tail. His friendly demeanor seemed to calm the girl slightly, though she still watched them warily. Liam noticed the patterns on her skin shifting colors, flickering between shades of green and purple. He'd never seen anything like it. "Alien," Liam whispered to Rachel, his voice tinged with awe. "She's definitely not from around here." Rachel nodded, keeping her gaze steady on the girl. "But why is she alone? And where did she come from?" The girl didn't answer, of course. Instead, she pointed toward the sky, her expression desperate. Then she mimicked the sound of engines roaring, making gestures as if something had fallen. Liam pieced it together quickly. Her ship had crashed, leaving her stranded. As they stood there, trying to figure out what to do next, Max leaned forward and licked the girl's hand. She jumped at first, startled, but then she looked at him curiously. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and touched his fur. A tiny smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. For now, at least, they had made a connection. But Liam couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, and possibly much more dangerous. Liam and Rachel carefully led the alien girl back to their outpost, making sure she felt safe along the way. Max stayed close by her side, his presence seeming to comfort her more than anything else. The girl walked hesitantly at first, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting something or someone to appear. But when Max nudged her hand with his nose, she relaxed a little, even managing a faint smile. The outpost was small but functional, designed for long-term stays on the barren moon. It had living quarters, a lab, and a communication station. Liam and Rachel brought the girl inside, setting her down on a chair near the table. She looked around curiously, her glowing eyes taking in every detail. Her hands fidgeted with the strange device she still carried, pressing buttons that no longer seemed to work. Rachel grabbed a bottle of water and offered it to her. "Here," she said softly, mimicking drinking motions to show what it was for. The girl hesitated, but eventually took the bottle. She sniffed it cautiously before taking a small sip. When nothing bad happened, she drank more eagerly, clearly thirsty. While Rachel tried to make the girl comfortable, Liam examined the broken device. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, smooth, metallic, and covered in intricate symbols that pulsed faintly with light. He tapped it gently, hoping to trigger some kind of response. But nothing happened. Frustrated, he set it aside and turned his attention back to the girl. "Do you think she's trying to call for help?" Rachel asked quietly, watching the girl closely. "It looks that way," Liam replied. "But without knowing how this thing works, we're stuck." They decided to try communicating through gestures and drawings instead. Rachel grabbed a piece of paper and sketched a simple picture of the stars, then pointed upward. The girl tilted her head, studying the drawing. After a moment, she nodded and pointed to herself, then to the sky again. She added another gesture, moving her hands as if flying. "She wants to go home," Rachel said, understanding dawning on her face. Liam nodded. "Makes sense. But how do we get her there?" As they puzzled over the problem, Max wandered over to the girl and dropped a chew toy at her feet. It was an old, worn-out ball, one of his favorites. The girl stared at it for a moment, confused, before picking it up. Max wagged his tail, clearly inviting her to play. Hesitant at first, she rolled the ball toward him. Max barked happily and chased after it, bringing it back moments later. This went on for several minutes, the girl laughing softly each time Max returned with the ball. It was the first real emotion they'd seen from her since finding her, and it broke the tension in the room. Even Liam couldn't help but smile as he watched the two interact. But the lighthearted moment didn't last long. As the hours passed, the girl grew restless. She kept pointing to the sky and making engine noises, growing increasingly agitated. It was clear she wanted to leave, but there was nothing Liam and Rachel could do to help. Not yet, anyway. Rachel tried to calm her by drawing more pictures, showing Earth and the moon they were on. She pointed to herself and Liam, then to the girl, trying to explain that they were all together now. The girl understood enough to stop pacing, though her frustration was still evident. Every so often, she would glance at her broken device, touching it as if willing it to work. Max, sensing her distress, rested his head on her lap. The girl looked down at him, her glowing eyes softening. She reached out and scratched behind his ears, just like Liam had done earlier. Max closed his eyes contentedly, leaning into her touch. For a brief moment, the sadness in her expression faded. "She trusts him," Rachel observed, smiling faintly. "Maybe that's a start." Liam agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Whoever, or whatever, she was, she didn't belong here. And sooner or later, they'd have to figure out a way to send her home. Until then, they'd do their best to keep her safe, and let Max be the bridge between worlds. Days passed, and life at the outpost settled into a new rhythm. The alien girl, who they now called Zyla, though they weren't sure if it was her real name or just something Rachel had started saying, was slowly adjusting to her surroundings. She still missed her home, that much was clear, but she seemed less frightened around Liam and Rachel. Max, of course, remained her constant companion. Wherever Zyla went, Max followed, his tail wagging and his ears perked up as if he understood everything she needed. Liam and Rachel spent hours trying to find ways to communicate with her. They drew pictures on scraps of paper, using simple shapes to represent the sun, stars, and planets. Zyla would point to the drawings, nodding or shaking her head depending on whether they were correct. Sometimes she added her own sketches, drawing strange symbols that neither Liam nor Rachel could decipher. But even these small exchanges felt like progress. One day, Rachel brought out a map of the solar system from the lab. She spread it across the table and pointed to Earth, then to the moon they were standing on. Zyla leaned forward, studying the map carefully. Her fingers traced the lines connecting the planets, her glowing eyes flickering with curiosity. Then, without warning, she grabbed a pen and began marking the map herself. She added dots and lines in places where no human charts existed, creating a pattern that looked almost like a star chart. "Is this her home?" Rachel asked, looking at Liam. He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's where she wants to go." Zyla tapped one of the marks repeatedly, pointing upward toward the ceiling. It was obvious she wanted them to understand. She needed to get back to wherever this place was. But the problem remained. They didn't have the technology to send her there, and her broken device offered no clues about how to fix it. Frustration bubbled beneath the surface for all of them. Zyla often paced the room, muttering sounds under her breath that might have been words in her language. One evening, she accidentally knocked over a cup of water while reaching for her device. The liquid spilled onto the floor, spreading quickly. Max sprang into action, lapping up the water with enthusiasm. Zyla froze, staring at him for a moment before bursting into laughter. It was unexpected and bright, filling the small outpost with warmth. That laugh changed something between them. For the first time, Zyla reached out and hugged Rachel tightly, surprising both humans. When she pulled away, she pointed to Max and then to Rachel, making a connection Liam hadn't noticed before. "Friend," Rachel said, smiling. "Max is our friend." Zyla repeated the word softly, testing it. Friend. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Zyla began learning more words, simple ones like food, water, and sky. She practiced them over and over, her voice hesitant but determined. Max became her favorite subject, and she loved asking for Max whenever he wandered out of sight. He always came running when she called, earning belly rubs and ear scratches as rewards. Despite these small victories, tension lingered. Zyla grew restless at night, staring out the window at the stars. Liam noticed her skin patterns shifting more frequently now, flashing shades of red and orange that signaled anxiety. Something was wrong, though she couldn't explain what. One morning, while scanning the horizon, Liam spotted movement in the distance. At first, he thought it was just another dust storm, but as he focused his binoculars, his stomach sank. Strange machines, sleek and metallic, hovered near the crash site where they'd found Zyla. They moved methodically, scanning the ground. "Rachel," Liam called urgently. "We've got company." When Rachel joined him, her face paled. "Are those drones?" "I don't know," Liam admitted. "But I don't think they're here for us." Zyla must have sensed their unease because she appeared moments later, clutching her broken device. Her eyes darted toward the window, wide with fear. Whatever those machines were, she recognized them, and she didn't trust them. Liam turned to Rachel. "We need to hide her. Now." As they scrambled to come up with a plan, Max barked sharply, his hackles raised. He stared at the door, ready to protect his new friend, no matter what came next. Liam and Rachel wasted no time. They quickly ushered Zyla into the small storage room at the back of the outpost, closing the door securely behind her. Max stayed close to her side, his ears pricked and his body tense. Zyla clutched her broken device tightly, her glowing eyes wide with fear as she looked up at Liam and Rachel. She didn't need to speak for them to understand. She knew those machines were dangerous. Outside, the drones drew closer, their sleek shapes gliding silently over the rocky terrain. Each one was about the size of a car, with sharp edges and glowing red sensors that scanned everything in their path. They moved with purpose, clearly searching for something or someone. Liam grabbed his binoculars again, watching as one of the drones hovered near the wreckage of Zilla's ship. It fired a thin beam of light at the debris, causing it to spark and smoke. "They're destroying the evidence," Rachel whispered, her voice tight with worry. "What if they find us?" "We can't let that happen," Liam said firmly. He glanced toward the storage room where Zilla was hidden. "We'll lead them away." Rachel nodded, though her face was pale. "How?" "Max," Liam said simply. "He's smart enough to distract them. If we send him out there, he can draw their attention." Rachel hesitated, looking at Max, who sat alertly by the door. "Are you sure? What if they hurt him?" "I don't like it either," Liam admitted. "But we don't have a choice. We can't fight those things, and we can't let them find Zyla." Rachel swallowed hard but didn't argue further. Together, they opened the storage room door slightly and called Max over. The dog bounded to them eagerly, wagging his tail until he saw the seriousness on their faces. Then he tilted his head, waiting for instructions. "Good boy," Liam murmured, kneeling down to scratch Max behind the ears. "You're going to help us, okay? Go out there and make some noise. Lead them away from here." Max barked once, as if to say he understood. Without hesitation, he bolted out the front door, barking loudly as he ran toward the drones. His sudden appearance startled the machines, which turned their glowing sensors toward him. One of the drones emitted a low hum, its red light focusing on Max as he darted between rocks and craters, leading it farther from the outpost. "That should buy us some time," Liam said, though his voice was grim. He turned to Rachel. "Let's get Zyla ready to move. If they double back, we'll need to be ready to run." Inside the storage room, Zyla watched anxiously as Liam and Rachel packed a small bag with supplies, water, food, and a few tools. When they explained their plan using gestures, she shook her head violently, pointing to Max and then to herself. She wanted to go after him. "No," Rachel said firmly, placing a hand on Zyla's shoulder. "We can't risk it. Max is doing this to keep you safe." Zyla's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she hugged the bag tightly, clutching it as if it could somehow protect her. Her skin patterns shifted rapidly, flashing shades of blue and purple, colors Liam and Rachel had come to recognize as sadness and fear. Minutes ticked by slowly. The sound of Max's barking grew fainter as he led the drones farther away. Just when Liam began to hope the plan might actually work, a loud explosion echoed across the landscape. Both humans froze, their hearts sinking. "What was that?" Rachel whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Liam rushed to the window, scanning the horizon. Smoke rose in the distance, marking the spot where Max had been moments earlier. "Oh no," he breathed. Zilla pushed past him, running to the window. When she saw the smoke, she screamed, a high-pitched, heart-wrenching sound that made Liam and Rachel flinch. Tears streamed down her face as she bolted for the door, ignoring their shouts to stop. "Zyla, wait," Liam called, chasing after her, but she was too fast. She ran outside, heading straight for the smoke, her cries echoing through the barren land. Rachel followed, grabbing a scanner and a flashlight. "We can't leave her alone." When they reached the site of the explosion, they found Max lying on the ground, his fur singed and his breathing shallow. One of the drones hovered nearby, its red sensor blinking ominously. Zyla dropped to her knees beside Max, cradling his head in her lap. Her hands trembled as she touched his fur, her glowing eyes filled with anguish. Max whimpered softly, lifting his head weakly to lick her hand. Zyla sobbed, pressing her face against his. For the first time since they'd met her, she spoke in her own language, her words soft and broken. Though Liam and Rachel couldn't understand what she said, the pain in her voice was unmistakable. The drone turned its attention to them, its hum growing louder. Liam stepped forward, shielding Zyla and Max with his body. "We need to move. Now." But Zilla refused to leave Max behind. Clutching him tightly, she whispered one word in English. "Friend." The drone hovered closer, its red sensor glowing brighter as it focused on the group. Liam stood firm, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew they couldn't fight the machine, but he also couldn't leave Zyla and Max unprotected. Rachel stepped beside him, holding up a makeshift EMP device they had built for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "Get ready," Lion whispered, glancing at Rachel. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the settings on the device. Zyla remained on the ground, cradling Max tightly. Her tears fell onto his fur, and though he was weak, Max tried to lift his head one last time, his tail giving a faint wag. The drone emitted a low hum, and a thin beam of light shot out from its underside, scanning the area. Liam tensed, knowing they had only seconds before it fired again. "Now," he shouted. Rachel pressed the button on the EMP device. A pulse of energy surged outward, crackling through the air like lightning. The drone shuddered violently, its lights flickering before going dark. With a final groan, it crashed to the ground, motionless. For a moment, there was silence. Then Zyla let out a soft sob, hugging Max even tighter. His breathing was shallow, his body limp in her arms. Liam knelt beside them, placing a hand on Zyla's shoulder. "We need to get him back to the outpost," he said gently. "He's still alive." Zilla hesitated but eventually nodded. With Liam and Rachel's help, she carefully lifted Max, carrying him as gently as possible. Every step seemed to weigh heavily on her, both physically and emotionally. Back at the outpost, they laid Max on a blanket near the fire, doing their best to clean his wounds and keep him comfortable. Zyla stayed by his side, refusing to leave even for a moment. As the hours passed, Max's condition worsened. His breathing grew slower, and his movements became almost non-existent. Zyla sat beside him, stroking his fur and whispering softly in her language. Occasionally, she would say the word "friend" in English, her voice breaking each time. Liam and Rachel watched from a distance, their hearts heavy. They wanted to comfort Zyla, but they knew nothing they said could ease her pain. Finally, late into the night, Max let out a soft sigh and closed his eyes for the last time. Zyla froze, staring down at him in silence. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and kissed his forehead, her tears falling onto his still form. Rachel approached cautiously, kneeling beside Zyla. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, though she doubted Zyla understood. Zyla didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small crystal pendant shaped like a dog. She pressed it into Max's fur, letting it rest against his chest. Liam joined them, his voice quiet. "We should bury him. It's the right thing to do." Zyla looked up, her glowing eyes filled with sadness but also determination. She nodded, understanding the gesture. Together, they carried Max outside and dug a grave near the outpost, marking it with a simple stone engraved with paw prints. Zyla placed the crystal pendant next to the marker, her hands lingering on it for a long moment. Afterward, Zyla returned to the outpost, sitting quietly by the window. Her skin patterns shifted slowly, flashing shades of blue and green, colors that seemed to represent grief and gratitude. Liam and Rachel gave her space, unsure of what else to do. The next morning, Zyla surprised them by picking up her broken device. She worked tirelessly, using parts from the lab and scraps from the outpost to repair it. Liam and Rachel helped as best they could, fetching tools and holding pieces steady. By the end of the day, the device began to glow faintly, emitting a soft hum. "It's working," Rachel said, her voice filled with hope. Zyla nodded, typing rapidly on the device. A beam of light shot upward, disappearing into the sky. She pointed to it, then to herself, signaling that she had sent a message. Relief washed over Liam and Rachel's faces, but Zyla's expression remained somber. She hugged them both tightly, pressing something into Liam's hand before stepping back. It was another crystal pendant, identical to the one she had left with Max. Zyla touched her chest, then pointed to the pendant, as if to say it was a piece of her heart. Before either of them could respond, she turned toward the window, waiting silently for her people to come. Hours later, a massive ship descended from the sky, its sleek design unmistakably Valen. Zyla's parents emerged, their expressions a mix of relief and gratitude. They embraced her warmly, speaking in soft tones. Through a translator device, they thanked Liam and Rachel for saving their daughter. As Zyla prepared to board the ship, she paused, looking back at Liam and Rachel one last time. Her glowing eyes were filled with emotion, sadness, gratitude, and hope. She held up her own crystal pendant, smiling faintly before disappearing inside. The ship ascended into the stars, leaving Liam and Rachel standing alone under the vast sky. They held the pendant close, knowing they would never forget the bond they had shared with Zyla, or the sacrifice made by a brave little dog named Max. Weeks passed after Zyla's departure, but life at the outpost felt different. The silence that once seemed peaceful now felt heavy, as if the absence of their alien friend and Max had left a void too big to fill. Liam and Rachel tried to focus on their work, collecting samples and analyzing data, but their thoughts often drifted back to the days they spent with Zyla. They missed her curiosity, her laughter, and even her frustration when she couldn't communicate. Most of all, they missed Max, whose playful energy had brightened every corner of their small world. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Liam sat outside with the crystal pendant Zyla had given him. He turned it over in his hands, watching the light catch its smooth surface. "Do you think she's okay?" he asked softly, glancing at Rachel, who sat beside him. Rachel nodded, wrapping her arms around her knees. She has to be. Her parents came for her, and they seemed strong, capable. "I hope so," Liam said, his voice tinged with sadness. She was just a kid. A brave one, though. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the wind sweep across the barren moon. It was strange how much had changed in such a short time. Before Zyla arrived, their days had been predictable. Wake up, work, eat, sleep. Now, everything felt different. Even the stars above seemed brighter, as if reminding them of the connection they'd shared with someone from another world. The next morning, Liam and Rachel decided to honor Max's memory by naming a newly discovered crater after him. Using their mapping equipment, they chose a spot not far from the outpost, a shallow depression surrounded by jagged rocks. They carved the name Max into a flat stone and placed it near the edge of the crater, along with a few paw prints etched into the surface. "It suits him," Rachel said, smiling faintly as she traced the letters with her fingers. "He always loved running around out here." Liam nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, he was a good dog. The best." As they stood there, reflecting on everything Max had done for them, and for Zyla, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Though his life had been short, he had made an impact far beyond what anyone could have expected. He had bridged the gap between two species, showing kindness and bravery when it mattered most. Back at the outpost, Liam and Rachel began organizing their notes and recordings from the time they spent with Zyla. They wanted to document everything: the crash, the drones, the language barriers, and the moments of joy they shared. It wasn't just for themselves. It was for anyone else who might encounter beings like the Valens someday. They included sketches of Zola's star chart, descriptions of her glowing skin patterns, and even a recording of her laughter. At the end of the file, they added a note about Max, describing his role in bringing them together. "We should send this to Earth," Rachel suggested one night as they reviewed the final draft. "Maybe someone can learn from it." Liam agreed. "It feels important. Like we were meant to meet her, for a reason." In the weeks that followed, they sent the report back to their research team, along with a request to name the crater after Max officially. To their surprise, the response came quickly. The crater would indeed bear his name, and their story would be shared with scientists and researchers across the globe. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Liam and Rachel. Still, some nights, they found themselves staring at the stars, wondering about Zyla. Was she happy? Did she miss them? Did she ever look at her own crystal pendant and think of Max? One evening, as they sat outside watching the moon's rise, Rachel broke the silence. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I think Max would have liked her. He always had a soft spot for those who needed protecting." Liam smiled faintly, holding the pendant up to the fading light. "Yeah," he replied, "and I think she'll remember us too." Far across the galaxy, aboard her family ship, Zyla gazed out a viewport at the endless expanse of stars. In her hand, she held the crystal pendant shaped like a dog, pressing it close to her chest. Though separated by unimaginable distances, the bond forged between a human dog and an alien child endured, a quiet reminder that compassion knows no boundaries. Months passed, and life on the moon returned to its usual rhythm. Liam and Rachel continued their work, but the memories of Zilla and Max lingered like a soft echo. The crater named after Max became a special place for them, a spot where they could sit and reflect whenever they needed a moment of peace. They often brought flowers or small rocks to leave near the marker, creating a simple memorial that grew over time. Despite their efforts to move forward, there were moments when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. One evening, as they sat outside the outpost watching the stars, Rachel turned to Liam with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what she's doing right now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam didn't need to ask who she meant. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the sky. "Every night," he admitted. "I hope she's happy. Safe." Rachel sighed, leaning back against the cool metal wall of the outpost. She was so brave, wasn't she? For such a little kid, she handled everything so well. "She had to," Liam replied. "And Max, he really helped her through it." His voice softened as he spoke about the dog. "He gave her something to hold on to when things got tough." Rachel smiled faintly, remembering how Zilla would laugh whenever Max chased his tail or brought her a chew toy. He made her smile when nothing else could. The silence between them stretched comfortably, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling across the barren landscape. After a while, Rachel stood up and brushed dust off her pants. "We should head inside," she said. "It's getting cold." As they walked back into the outpost, Liam paused at the doorway, glancing at the table where Zilla used to sit drawing pictures. Her sketches still lay scattered across its surface, simple shapes of stars, planets, and spaceships. Some were labeled with words she'd learned in English: sky, home, and of course, friend. He picked one up and studied it closely, feeling a pang of nostalgia. "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Rachel asked suddenly, startling him out of his thoughts. Liam hesitated before answering. "Maybe not," he said honestly, "but that doesn't mean we won't remember her, or what happened here." Rachel nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Their encounter with Zilla had changed them in ways they couldn't fully explain. It had shown them that even in the vastness of space, connections could form between beings who seemed completely different, and it had taught them the power of kindness, the kind of kindness Max had shown without hesitation. That night, as they prepared for bed, Liam placed the crystal pendant Zilla had given him on the shelf beside his bunk. Its smooth surface caught the dim light from the lantern, casting tiny raindrops of color onto the wall. He stared at it for a long moment before turning off the light. Far away, aboard her family ship, Zyla gazed out a viewport at the endless expanse of stars. She held her own crystal pendant tightly, her fingers tracing its edges as if trying to memorize every detail. Her parents had noticed how much she treasured it, though they didn't fully understand why. To them, it was just a small object, a keepsake from her journey. But to Zila, it meant so much more. She thought about Max often, replaying his playful barks and wagging tail in her mind. She remembered the way he licked her hand when she was scared, how he'd stayed by her side even when danger loomed. And she remembered Liam and Rachel, the humans who had risked everything to keep her safe. They had become her friends, just like Max. One day, during a quiet moment, Zyla pulled out a sketchbook and began drawing. She sketched the human dog first, capturing his floppy ears and wide grin. Then she drew Liam and Rachel, standing beside her under a starry sky. When she finished, she added a glowing heart in the corner of the page, connecting all four figures together. Her mother found her later, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by drawings. "What are you working on?" she asked gently, kneeling beside her. Zyla looked up, her large eyes shimmering with emotion. "Friends," she said simply, holding up the picture for her mother to see. Her mother smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They must have been very special." Zyla nodded, clutching her pendant close. "Yes," she whispered, "very special." Though separated by countless light years, the bond between Zyla and the humans, and the memory of a brave little dog, remained unbroken. It was proof that even in the vastness of the universe, acts of love and courage left ripples that traveled far beyond what anyone could imagine. Time moved on, as it always does. The moon where Liam and Rachel worked remained quiet, its surface unchanged by the events that had unfolded there. But for the two humans, life was forever marked by their brief encounter with Zyla and Max. They continued their research, sending reports back to Earth and analyzing data, but their hearts often wandered to the stars. One evening, as they sat outside the outpost watching the moon's rise, Liam pulled out the crystal pendant Zyla had given him. He held it up to the light, letting it catch the glow of the distant gas giant. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I think we'll carry this with us forever." Rachel nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's not just a piece of crystal. It's a reminder. Of Max, of Zyla, of everything." The crater named after Max became a place they visited often. Sometimes they brought flowers or small tokens to leave near the marker. Other times, they simply sat in silence, remembering the dog who had changed their lives. Max's memory lived on not just in their hearts, but also in the stories they told each other about his bravery and loyalty. Their report about Zyla and the drones had reached Earth months ago, sparking interest among scientists and researchers. Some praised Liam and Rachel for their quick thinking, while others marveled at the connection they had formed with an alien child. The story of Max spread too, becoming a symbol of courage and compassion across cultures. Schools even began teaching lessons about how a simple act of kindness could bridge worlds. But for Liam and Rachel, none of that mattered as much as the personal impact the experience had on them. They found themselves looking at the universe differently, less like something vast and unknowable, and more like a place full of possibilities. Every time they looked at the stars, they wondered if Zyla was doing the same, somewhere far away. On the other side of the galaxy, aboard her family ship, Zyla stood by a viewport, gazing at the stars. She wore her crystal pendant around her neck, its smooth surface warm against her skin. Her parents noticed how often she lingered there, lost in thought, and sometimes joined her. They didn't fully understand why the pendant meant so much to her, but they respected her attachment to it. One night, as the ship drifted through a field of glowing nebulae, Zyla took out her sketchbook. She flipped through the pages filled with drawings of Liam, Rachel, and Max. Each picture was accompanied by a word she'd learned in English: friend, home, sky. She smiled faintly, running her fingers over the images. Her father entered the room quietly, sitting beside her. "What are you drawing?" he asked curiously. Zyla showed him the latest sketch, a human dog playing fetch under a starry sky. "Max," she said softly. Then she pointed to another drawing of Liam and Rachel. "Friends." Her father studied the pictures carefully, his expression thoughtful. "They sound like wonderful beings." "They were," Zyla replied, her voice tinged with both sadness and gratitude. "They helped me when I needed it most." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "And you remember them. That's important." Zyla nodded, clutching her pendant tightly. She turned back to the viewport, her eyes scanning the stars. Though she couldn't see the moon where she had met Liam, Rachel, and Max, she knew it was out there somewhere. And she hoped that maybe, just maybe, they were looking at the same stars right now. Years later, long after Liam and Rachel returned to Earth, their story became legend. Scientists referenced their report in studies about first contact, teachers used it to inspire students, and storytellers passed it down as a tale of hope and connection. The crater named after Max appeared on official maps of the moon, ensuring that his legacy endured. As for Zoila, she grew into a wise and compassionate leader among her people. She often spoke of her time on the moon, sharing stories of the humans and the brave dog who had saved her. Her sketches of Max, Liam, and Rachel hung proudly in her quarters, reminders of the bond that transcended species and galaxies. Though separated by unimaginable distances, the connection between Zyla, Liam, Rachel, and Max remained unbroken. It was proof that even in the vastness of space, acts of kindness left ripples that traveled farther than anyone could imagine. And whenever Zyla touched her pendant or Liam held his clothes, they felt it, the quiet assurance that friendship, once forged, never truly fades.